Our speaker tonight is Gary Freitag, Professor of Oceanography through the University of Alaska Fairbanks, College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences. He also works with Alaska Sea Grant and the Marine Advisory Program. His expertise is in oceanography and salmon fisheries. He has developed expertise in marine mammal necropsy and disentanglement through working with NOAA's Marine Mammal Stranding Network. In addition, he works with research and outreach efforts in the areas of invasive species, baseline marine monitoring, salmon fishery forecasting and assessment. He also dedicates effort into teaching classes for the UAS Fisheries Technologies program, and we are so lucky to have him speaking here tonight. Please help me welcome Gary.
Thank you. I think I need to stand back just a little bit here. I'll just stay right here and talk. Everybody hear me okay?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So tonight, the title's changed quite a bit. I've got whales in Southeast Alaska and marine mammal interactions. And what I want to cover tonight is what are some common cetaceans and pinnipeds, which are cetaceans are the whales, pinnipeds are the seals, the sea lions, things like that we see around here. What is the status of them? I want to cover some of that to tell you what's around and how well they're doing. I'm going to talk about the Marine Mammal Stranding Program, the network that I work with and know. I've been on that since 1989, I believe, is when I first started doing whale necropsies and working with whales. What are the regulations? I'll just mention those. I'm not going to go over a lot of that because it's boring. And I'm going to go over some examples of some of the responses that I've had to do over the time. A couple of them are well documented, so I thought I'd show you what we have to do when we have to respond to an animal and what it's about. And then a couple of them are killer whale, orca necropsy, humpback disentanglement. I have a stellar sea lion thing in here as well that I'll talk about just for a second. So this is just a picture that was on the flyer that I took out in front of the university, the lower campus. They were out there bubble netting, and you'll see other pictures of that here. Surely I'll talk about bubble netting, what that's about in a minute. But what do we have in the way of seals and sea lions, sea otters? We have, of course, the main sea lions you see here are stellar sea lions, but some of them that are around here are also the California sea lion, but most of them are the stellar sea lion. They're considerably larger. We, of course, have sea otters. We don't have any right around Ketchikan right now. The only thing we have here are the land otters, the river otters, that also hang around in the ocean. But they're moving very, very rapidly, moving into this area. They're over on Prince of Wales Island. We know they're on the inside. They're as far down the coast of from Cape Chacken north, all the way up to almost to Moria Sound. People have seen them in Moria Sound and a few places like that. There may be closer examples because you don't always see this stuff right away. So some of you may know I've seen them a little bit closer. But I've gotten reports here in Ketchikan of them, and I've never seen one. And I'm fairly sure that what people are seeing are river otters in this area. There's also been a couple of Guadalupe seals that have showed up in Seward and places like that. So they've gone through this area. And so that's very odd. These are usually they're not even listed to be in this area, but they do show up here. We also have a lot of harbor seals, which is what you see in the way of seals here. And we also have this northern elephant seal. And probably you've seen these, but didn't know what they were. They're when you see them in the water, they normally like just hang flat and they stick their head up and they look like a deadhead, floating up and down in the water. They're real big, but they will swim. When they start swimming, they make a nice wake when they're going through the water on the surface. But there are northern elephant seals here. I've had to do work on a lot of stellar sea lions and a lot of harbor seals. And I work with the NOAA, a Marine Mammal Stranding Network, which has responsibility for all the seals and sea lions. Sea otters are under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so I'm not even permitted to work with those. I have had, they've asked me to do it. And they give me permission to go and, for example, if a baby sea otter on the west coast is found, they brought him over here and they asked me to go get it and babysit it until I can get it on a plane to go to Anchorage where they rehab them up in Anchorage. And that has happened. Normally, I end up just going over to the airport and just staying with it. And of course, all the people behind the counters over there, they all rush down to look at this little tiny baby sea otter, and we're feeding it with some milk or something. They think it's really cool. Okay, what about dolphins and porpoise? And I'm going to talk more about the difference between dolphins and porpoise here in a minute, so you don't have to ask a question about it. But what do we have here? There are northern right whales, but there's very few of those around right now. Well, not the dolphin. I don't think we've got the dolphin here, but the right whale itself, which you'll see another picture of. But we do have this species right here. This is very common in this area, Pacific white-sided dolphin, okay? That animal has been here on a regular basis, and they tend to be on more pelagic or open water. They tend to stay offshore. But there was a couple years where these things came in, and these, by the way, the dolphins will be in huge pods. There were several thousand of these animals in one pod that went through. Those of you who've been here for a long time probably remember when that happened. It was, I don't know, it's been a lot of years ago. But they were just incredible numbers. There was one time we went out on a boat in Beam Canal. As far as you could see, there were nothing but fins from the Pacific white-sided dolphins. And so those are real common. Let me get back here. And sometimes when they show up. They also showed up real heavily in BC this year. There were lots of them in BC, in the inside waters. We also have, of course, when you start talking about animals here, we have the doll porpoise, which you're all familiar with. That's the common porpoise you see when you're out in your boat and they're playing on the bow of the boat and things like that. That's the doll porpoise. And we also have harbor porpoise here, okay? And these are kind of interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. By the way, this is a Gulf of California type of porpoise, and they think now there's only 10 alive in the world. Only 10 of them. So they think they're going to be extinct here real shortly. They're talking about doing some kind of major effort of going out and catching them and then try to protect them and breed them and all that other stuff. But there's only 10 of them alive right now, is what they expect. They've been declining very fast. There's a fishery down there that they interact with that the guys were killing most of them. They think, and it's up in the northern part of the Gulf of California, Baja California area. So those get hammered pretty bad. Where are the whale pictures? Oh, here. Okay, here's the comparison between dolphins and porpoise. And I'll just mention a few of these things. Dolphins, the dorsal fin on the back is usually curved. The porpoise have more triangular back. The teeth are different. They're cone-shaped in the dolphins and spade-like in the porpoise. There's different behaviors here. Sizes, the dolphins grow about 12 feet long. Porpoise are less than 7 feet. Even though dolphins get bigger than this, because we're going to talk about the killer whale, which is also a dolphin. It's just a large dolphin. They're longer and sleeker. Dolphins are. Porpoise. This was interesting to me. I didn't know this until I researched it. And dolphins produce sounds that are audible to humans, but porpoise, all the sounds they make are inaudible. They're out of our frequency range of what we can hear, which is kind of interesting. The dolphins live in large groups. Porpoise live in pods of maybe 2 to 4 animals. Dolphins live more than 50 years. Porpoise live maybe to the age of 15. So those doll porpoise don't live very long. 15 years is common. There's gestation, they're not too much different. But this is interesting, the range. Dolphins are found in all oceans, porpoise are only found in the Pacific Ocean, which I didn't know that either. Oh, let's see if we've got anything else. No, everything else is pretty. Okay, toothed whales. What do we have here? Well, we've got the killer whale, which actually is a dolphin. They have a list of other toothed whales in the book, but it's truly not. It's a large dolphin. We've got sperm whales. We have those here. They're offshore. The only interaction that we're having with the sperm whale is they have a tendency to prey on black-cod fisheries. I don't know if you've heard about this, but what the sperm whales off of Sitka and farther offshore, where they're fishing deep water black-cod and things like that, and you've noticed it, I think, Bill, right? You've been involved with some of that. They learn that from the sounds of the boat, when they're cycling their engines, they learn, hey, they're pulling gear, and they go over to where they're pulling this long line gear up, and they sit there and pick off the fish off the line as they're bringing it up. So now the guys have all kinds of methods they think they can defeat them, and that is by putting two boats in the water, and one boat cycles the engine, he's not pulling any gear, and the other guy pulls the gear, and they can kind of trick them for a little bit, but then they figure it out. They're real smart. Bill, you've got experience with that, right?
Yeah, I think, back when I was doing it, they figured about 30%. I don't think it's changed much.
Yeah. So we do have sperm whales in this area. Also, let's see. Of all these others, there's really not a whole lot of these others. Now, the one thing I should mention, that a lot of these whales will show up in this area at times. It doesn't mean because they're not seen as common in this area, they're maybe not going to show up. They do, a lot of these species do show up. So you can always be fooled by what you see here. And of course, the baleen whales are the ones you're all familiar with. The humpback whale is the most common in this area. But we've definitely have blue whales out in Dixon Entrance. There's folks that come up from BC and study the blue whales in Dixon Entrance. And fin whales and sea whales, some of those have showed up on the bows of some of the cruise ships. And we also have gray whales, but the gray whales are offshore here. They're migrating up the coast. Why they're doing that and they're not through here is because they don't feed on schooling fish like the humpbacks. They go down and they grab sand and they filter the sand with all the worms and the clams and everything that's in there. So they're migrating up the coast to go into the Bering Sea in places where the water's shallower, and they can go down and grab sand and feed through their baleen plates. So gray whales are here, and I'll show you a picture of one here in a moment that I took. I've only done one response on a gray whale, and that was one that was very early when I first started. It had a buoy. It was dragging a buoy, and it was off Guard Island, and it was heading up towards Beam Canal. And a helicopter company went out, and they went out and cut the line off. But the buoy had a number on it, so we know what was on it. It was a crab trap from up towards Yakutat. So it had pulled a large crab pot all the way down, I'm sure a commercial pot, all the way down from up that way, Yakutat, down to here. So we've seen that. And like I say, there was in fact, this year, there were some of these sea whales, these sea whales here, a lot of those died. There was large mortality on them in the Aleutian chain this last year. There also is some right whales, and I'll talk a minute about those and how many of those are left. Another common one around here, you used to see a lot more of them, is this minke whale. It's a smaller whale, and I've seen them out at George Inlet. They're also one of these whales that'll go down to the bottom and filter feed through the sediments, but they also will go after herring at times, and they'll feed on herring spawning areas. They used to see them a lot in Shakin, or not Shakin, down south where they used to have those big herring fisheries down there. Yeah, Kashakes. They used to be minke whales down there a lot when they first had those fisheries. But I haven't seen many of these lately. But we used to see them quite a bit 20, 30 years ago. And I just haven't seen a lot of them. It doesn't mean there's a problem with them. It's just they're not hanging around here anymore. So status of the common species, we see humpback whales. They're Endangered Species Act because they're listed. And in fact, some of them are. They're not all the areas in the world are not listed, but the ones up here are right now. Pre-whaling days, there were 15,000 of them were estimated before they were whaling on them. They ended whaling in 66, around 66, and at that time, they knocked the population down to 1,200 animals. And then currently, in 2018, the estimate was 22,000. So they've responded very, very favorably. In fact, we were looking at like 5 to 10 years ago, it was like every year there was about an 8 to 10% increase in the whale numbers. Now it's down, I think, around 4%. Probably because now they're reaching a maximum number that the environment can handle. There's also the right whales are in this area. Pre-whaling, there were over 20,000 of them. They think there's only about 40 of them left in the North Pacific. So those are in trouble. Right whales are in trouble on the East Coast as well. Yes?
That was part of a gray whale census, I think it was 79. At the time, they were estimated 10,000, so that's been a real success.
Yeah, it's estimated right around 27,000. So they've come up, and they're actually off of the endangered species list.
Yes, but
They're not on it anymore. They actually tried to get the humpback whales off of it this last year, but were unsuccessful at doing that.
Is that right whale, the ones that the native people of the north are still allowed to?
No, those are bowhead whales.
They don't do the right whales?
They're not allowed to.
Okay.
They're an endangered species. They're not supposed to be. Whether or not they do it or not is another story. I don't know.
Okay.
I've never heard of them going in. They're pretty sharp when it comes to knowing what species they're fishing on, so I don't think there's a problem with that. And the bowhead whales, I don't know, do we have any on here? I don't know whether this book's got any of them or not. No, they don't have them listed. I don't see them there. But the bowheads are the ones that they're fishing up there, and they're not listed. They're not listed. But they have a very strict management. I mean, they don't harvest very many of them. But they're totally subsistence driven there. I mean, they have to. That's how they live. They survive off of those whales. And nobody has a problem with it. The right whale was called the right whale. Does everybody know why it was called the right whale? Because it's the right one to fish. Because they wouldn't sink to hunt. They'd float. They've got tremendous amount of blubber in them, and they're very buoyant. And when you harpoon them, some of the other whales that they would do if they hit them in the right spot and their body cavity flooded, they'd sink. The right whale wouldn't. So they were always ones that they could gather the animal with. The East Coast, they've got real restrictive shipping regulations now. They're only allowed to go 10 knots on ships, for example, in areas where they're common. So the big ships have to slow down to 10 knots now to protect the right whale. It's kind of an interesting thing. So on our area, talking about gray whales, this is from a trip I made when I was doing some invasive species work, and I took this picture offshore. This is where the gray whales are passing. This is Forrester Island out here, and this is Doll Island. And we were flying along here, and down below there was a gray whale. And that's what a gray whale, if you look at them, they've got a lot of white on their back. They're all mottled colors on their back. They don't look anything like a humpback underwater from the air or when you're in the water looking at them. So if you ever see one, it's going to have a lot of white on there. So humpback whales, those are the common ones here, of course, and their basic winter grounds are Hawaii, and some of them do go down off of Mexico and South America area, but they almost all, even the winter breeding area for the ones that go over to Asia and the Philippines, they all go up into our area to feed, okay? And this is where they go feed. When they migrate from here and go south, they're only going down there to either mate or give birth. They're not going down there to eat. There's no food down there. There's a tiny bit, and they have reported, I work with one of the guys that works out of Hawaii that's the head of the disentanglement program, and he said they've now seen them actually feeding a little bit down there, not a lot, because there's not very many schooling fish, because they have to be able to, concentrate the fish. So when they leave here, they're going down here. There's also a large number that don't go anymore. You've seen them all winter here. You can see them all winter, and there's more and more staying here. That's not because of, they're just changing the way they're behaving. I think it's the reason we see more and more of them is because there's more and more of them in the water, because there's more survival now. And so you're seeing more of them in this area. But they do come up here to feed. Common method, you've probably all seen this, or a lot of you have, and they call bubble netting. It's where the whales will get, 2 or 3 of them will get together, and one of them will go down below, or 2 of them will go down below, and they blow bubbles around a school of herring or euphausids, which I'll show you a picture of here in a moment. And what it does, those euphausids all get freaked out, and they all congregate into a tight ball, and then they all come up in the middle of that with their mouths open, and of course they swallow a big gulp of fish and water, and then they use their tongue to push the water through the baleen and concentrate the fish and the herring or euphausids against the side walls of the mouth, and then they swallow. And by the way, everybody always asks me, well, can they swallow big fish too? And I said, no, they can't, because the throat is about the size of a cantaloupe. That's about the size of the throat, okay? And a funny story that I'll tell you about. When I first started with this, I used the Coast Guard to take me out to the whales. And I went down to the base and asked the guys, well, I need you to take me over to it was by Kassam Bay there, and there was a whale on the beach, and the base commander came up to me and said, listen, we got a new guy, he's in from Nebraska, he knows nothing about this stuff, we want you to give him a hard time. We told him he has to help you work on this animal. And so we got a flashlight, and we're going across, he'll be dressed in this yellow outfit. And so I went over to him and I said, hey, I heard you're going to help us, and we're going across Clarence Strait. And he says, yeah, he was all nervous as could be. And I went ahead and said, yeah, we're going to give you this flashlight. We're going to hold the mouth, and we're going to have you climb down in there and take some tissue from the heart and all that, And he was all nervous as could be. And then once we got about 3/4 where, I said, you don't have to do it. You couldn't do it in the first place. You can't get in there, and the throat's only this size. But I said, you can come ashore and take a look at this, because there's not a lot of people see them real close up like that. And he was thrilled to go over and go on the beach. It was really, really fun. But they do that kind of stuff. Anyway, this is just some shots out in back of my office there down at the lower campus. And these are all bubble netting. You can actually see the little herring being thrown off as they come up. Their bubbles just throw them up in the air, and they're swallowing everything. So their primary food is herring here and euphausids. Now, you may have seen these on the beach. And I've gotten calls about these saying, oh, there's all these dead baby shrimp on the beach. They're not baby shrimp. That's an adult euphausid. It's about 1 inch long. And those get in tremendous concentrations right around this time, in the spring and places like that. And they behave the same way as the herring. They can bubble net those. They'll all congregate, and they can swallow large numbers of those euphausids. They're called krill. Another term for this is krill. Okay, they're just a little, and I've seen piles of this washing up on Boige's Beach or Rotary Beach out here, that probably that thick of layers of them, the whole beach covered with it. Yes?
I remember a few years ago, there were a couple humpbacks right downtown. They were there
Yep.
in the middle of the winter. What do you think they were feeding on?
Herring.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, yeah, there's a lot of herring in the channel in the middle of the winter, and they were just down there feeding on herring. Euphals, it's probably not. Although I've seen in I want to say March, this time of the year, I've seen euphals at concentrations where they're feeding off of like out towards Nichols Pass and those kind of places. So yeah, they're around.
And other feed, I don't know if there's candlefish or other.
Well, there are
Snake
others
guys
that
or-
they will go after. I mean, they also have homed in on salmon releases now too from hatcheries.
Right, I know that, yeah.
And NSERA, Northern Southeast Regional Aquaculture Association, has a lot of problems with it. They've actually got a group of them there that have figured it out really well, and they know exactly when those guys are going to open the net pens to release the fish, and they go bubble net the fish. So now they're going through this thing where they dribble the fish out, and if you don't get a lot of them out at one time, they can't bubble net to make it efficient enough to be worth it. So, but yeah, they'll home in on any schooling fish. It doesn't matter, as long as they're small enough that they can swallow. I'm sure perch at times, if they're in a big enough concentration out here, they'll go after those. They'll go after anything that they can swallow, including candlefish or any of those. Euligans, if they're concentrated enough. So the Marine Mammal Stranding Network bases everything on a stranded animal is one that is dead on the beach or in the water, one that is alive on the land and unable to return to the water, and or is in need of medical attention, or a live animal in the water that is unable to return to its natural habitat under its own power or without assistance. And an example of that last one is, do you remember, probably 15, 20 years ago, there was a bunch of killer whales went in one of the bays, Golden Galleon up in northern Prince of Wales. They went into a bay there, and they got trapped in there. And they couldn't get out, and several of the killer whales died, and they ended up, they made a response, the Marine Mammal Stranding Network made a response. They had pipes, and they herded them basically to the exit, and they got out. A few of them did, but I had to run logistics for it here. I never had to go out and work directly on them, but I ran logistics of gear that I had sent out there. And some of those died out there in the lake. And I'm sure the skeletons are still in the woods where they put those animals. So what can you collect? I'm going to talk about collecting bones and things like that, because a lot of people ask questions, what can I grab? I get a call once a year saying, can I keep this bone or whatever? Well, there's the policy that I was told. This is something that was put out because of some real problems up north that people were getting into. We haven't had much of an issue down here, but I've had some people that have bones and things like that. It's not legal to take anything with an endangered species. They're not permitted to recover any bones, even on the beach. You're not permitted to do it. If it's a non-endangered species, you can possess the bones. The difference is you have to, within 30 days, go to the U.S. Fish or the NOAA office, and they will give you a permit to hold those. You can't sell them, you can't do anything with them, but you can collect them and keep the bones. So the right whale, of course, you can't collect anything. Gray whales, since they're not endangered, if you find the bone, you can keep the bones, but they do not want you're not allowed to take the baleen. And notice they say non-native. Alaska natives have the ability to collect even some of the endangered, although they get in a lot of trouble if they go after some of the endangered species. But they don't want them to do it. You have to get something. It has something to do with your what ethnic group you are, and who the landownership is of the animal that washes up on the beach, those kind of things. And a lot of this stuff pertains to up in the North Slope and Nome and places like that where a lot of this stuff happens. We don't have much of those issues. So gray whale, you could keep them. Humpback whales differs by stock. The ones that are down this area are still considered endangered. They tried to get them unlisted, but as a result of that, You're not permitted to have anything from a humpback, even though I'm going to show you a humpback. I have the permits because of being on this group to handle all that stuff and possess it. Bowhead whales, well, see, they are somewhat endangered according to this, but they're allowed, the natives are allowed to do it, but non-natives are not allowed to collect. The minke whales, there's no ESA status, so you can collect the bones but not the baleen. They won't let you keep the baleen for some reason. Fin whales, endangered, can't collect. Beluga, we don't have any of those. Killer whales, they're not endangered here. They are endangered now. The southern population is endangered, and you've got a southern resident stock, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Orca or harbor porpoise, they're really difficult to see. I haven't seen any. I've worked on probably maybe 4 of those animals I've done necropsies on, and but I haven't seen any lately. But you're allowed to keep the bones, teeth, or ivory, or any of that stuff from the harbor porpoise. On the killer whale, you're allowed to keep them. But I can tell you an example. I'm going to show you an example where somebody took the teeth, and if there's any meat at all anywhere around the parts, you're not allowed to take it. It has to be totally disarticulated, which means it has to fall apart and the meat can't be on the bone. And they do that because they want to get scientific information from that stuff. In terms of seals, the only thing we have in this area that you worry about is kind of the harvest here. Although we have had a couple of southern spotted seals have showed up in the region, but they're very rare. But none of these are threatened that we have in this area, so you can keep everything, and the natives can keep everything. Sea lions, stellar sea lions east of Cape Suckling, Alaska. There's no trouble. So stellar sea lions in this area are not endangered, so you can keep parts from those. You can keep the bones and teeth and anything else associated with them. But up in the western region, west of Cape Suckling, which means the Aleutian chain loss, they're endangered. So it depends on the stock. Pacific walrus, we don't have any. Polar bears, of course, we don't have any of those. Not yet. It's starting to happen, but not yet. Sea otters, they're threatened in southwest Alaska, but here, no, they're on the climb very rapidly right now. So, Alaska humpback whale approach, how close can you get? I always get questions about this, so I wanted to say something. You're not supposed to get within 100 yards of any marine mammals, even the sea lions and seals. So 100 yards is what they're saying. You're not supposed to place your vessel in the path of an oncoming humpback while causing them to surface within 100 yards of your vessel. You're not supposed to disrupt the normal behavior or prior activity of a whale, and operate your vessel at a slow, safe speed when near a humpback. That's the stuff you're supposed to do. A lot of this is unavoidable. A lot of times you don't see the whale until it's right on under your boat. I mean, you just don't see it. So you're not going to get in trouble over that, no matter what. So the response is, here's a picture of me up on top of a whale back in 1994, one of the first humpbacks I worked on, a friend of mine, Scott Shelton. And this is a humpback that washed up on Sumez Island. And I'm going to show you a bone from this animal here in a few minutes. And this, we never did find out what actually killed that whale, but we did cut parts out of it and send samples off. And unfortunately, a lot of the volunteers like myself, we send all these samples off and I never see the results of what comes from the samples. I know they do analysis and they put it through all kinds of review, but I never see what the story is. But we never found out what happened to that animal. And it was interesting, when we first got to this animal, this belly, which is all the folds are there so that when it takes that big gulp of water, it expands and they can get a big mouthful of fish and water. And when they fall over and like this and the mouth is closed, and they have that in there, it starts rotting. The internal organs of the animal, just gases build up tremendous pressure. And people have actually been with a flensing knife, like this flensing knife here. In fact, this one I used on this next picture I'm going to show. I have this flensing knife. When they stick it in the animal, they can blow up. People have been injured because the pressure is so great in there. What we did with this animal is we stood back and took a shotgun with a slug and we shot a hole in the, just about right in the middle here, and it just vented like somebody broke the top off a scuba tank. Shh, and smell, oh man, it was something else. And we ran upwind and sat, it took 20 minutes to deflate. Okay, that's how long it took. And this one here, you probably all are familiar with. This is the one that was on the bow of that cruise ship a couple of years ago. And this is the response we had. We had all these people that volunteered to go out and help. And a lot of these were, this is me here, and we did a lot of cutting, and we got organs from just about everything on this animal. And again, I don't know the final results, because everybody asked me, did you figure out what killed that animal? And I said, no, I don't know what killed that animal. Everybody said, oh, the ship hit it. We're sure the ship hit it. And the answer is, yeah, the ship hit it, but was it dead when it was floating at the surface and the ship hit it? I don't know. It might have been. But you can tell from the samples that they got, they're probably, it's all in litigation, so they haven't told us what the answer is, because they're probably still talking with the lawyers of the cruise ship companies and everything about what's going on. But it may not have been dead or alive at all when the ship hit it. And one biologist yelled at me from Glacier Bay saying, well, you know, you were on the radio and you said you don't know what caused it. You know darn well it got hit by the cruise ship. I said, yeah, I know the cruise ship hit it, but I don't know if it was alive when the cruise ship hit it. And she said, well, what's the chances of a dead whale getting hit by a cruise ship? I said, probably a hell of a lot more than a live one, because the live one's going to try to get out of the way if it can hear the ship. So I don't know the answer. It may have killed it. We absolutely have evidence that they do hit these animals alive. We know that because there's film cameras on the ships a lot of times. There's that one in Glacier Bay. If you've been to Glacier Bay and they have that skeleton reproduced there, they have a diagram, they have a picture of from the bridge looking down and seeing the whale in front of the ship just as before it hit it. So they know it was alive when it was hit by the ship. So we don't know the answer, but you do the necropsy. Now, what would you look for? You'd look for the fact that if the heart's not pumping and nothing's going on, the blood's not going to be all, it's just not going to be pushed into all different areas of the animal. Where if it's dead, because it died of natural causes or something else, the chances are the blood's not going to be just a little, it'll be right where the damage was, where the ship hit it. We just don't know the answer to these things. Very few of these animals that you ever see what causes their death directly. They have to do the forensic analysis on all the, we take all the fluids, different kinds of fluids out of them. We take heart tissue, all the lung tissue, all that stuff out of them and send those samples off.
How big is the heart?
The heart's pretty good size on those.
What's that white thing coming out?
This is the flipper. This is the underside. That's the bottom of the flipper. This is another whale that I had to respond to. I got a report that the whale had washed up on Lone Tree Island on the west coast. Prince of Whale out off of by Suez Island out in that area. And I said, Lone Tree Island? It's not even on the map, Lone Tree Island, but it's called Lone Tree Island? Well, the next time we flew out, it made sense why they called it Lone Tree Island. There's one tree in the middle of this island out there, and there's the carcass all decomposing on the island over there. This was probably a good 2 months later. We actually went down and collected samples from that animal. Now here's another interaction that I wanted to talk to you a minute about, because I get calls every year, right around this time, about sea lions that are having struggling, okay? And this is a picture that I took because I responded to this one. It was, I can't even remember where it was, off of Buggy's Beach or somewhere. And sea lions will have a habit of 2 or 3 of them will get together and one of them will stick their flipper up in the air and wave it around. And everybody thinks I had one that somebody said, oh, there's a killer whale out there killing sea lions, because they saw the other sea lions there and they saw this flipper up in the air and it looked like the fin. And I get calls every year about this. And it's real common for it to do it. We don't know what the behavior is about. It's usually on a sunny day, so it's suspicion that the flipper has got a lot of vessels in it and they're just sucking up sunlight for heat, because, to put into their body. But there's people that also say that it's probably a mating behavior of some sort. So we don't know the answer to that. There's a whole lot we don't know about marine mammals, by the way. If anybody tells you they know what's going on, they don't. We have very little information on any of this stuff. But sometimes sea lions are struggling. This is a stellar sea lion with a steel-belted radial tire around its neck, and this is Pennock Island, and this is the rocks right off of Pennock, just south of town here. And I had heard about this animal swimming around for about a month. About a month it was swimming around with this tire around its head. And how it was able to do that, because you can imagine pushing a flat surface that big through the water, how much resistance that must cause, and how it was hunting. But it actually was pretty it was pretty emaciated. It didn't have a lot of blubber or anything. You could see its ribs and stuff. But I got the call about this, that it was up on the rock, so I got a hold of Boyd Porter, who's the Fish and Wildlife with ADF&G, and he's the guy that works on bears and everything. And he had all the proper chemicals and darts, the dart thing, and all that. And we said, well, let's try and get this tire off him. So we went out in a boat, and we go up to this animal, and you're worried about it, because if you knock it out and it gets scared and jumps off, it'll drown. So he didn't take a gun to fire the dart. He had a blowgun. So we're in the boat, and we come up next to it here, and he goes like that, and the dart goes in its butt, and the sea lion gets, he gets all worked up, and we quick went back to the beach so it wouldn't jump in the water, and it kind of lays down out there, and waited 20 minutes, went back out, and Boyd says, oh, okay, I'll go in there and try to pull that tire off. And he jumps up on this rock. We pulled the boat up here, and he grabs the tire and he pulls on it, and the thing roared up and scared him. I've never seen a biologist fly, but he was capable of flying. He actually flew into the boat. We backed off. He puts another dart in with a chemical in there, and it roars up and gets nasty again. And pretty soon, 20 minutes later, we come back out, and this time I grabbed the tire with a boat hook and just started pulling on it, and the head was just flopping back and forth. So we jumped on the shore, and we had to cut that tire off.
Wow.
We had to cut the tire off with a hacksaw, because the steel belt was buried into the skin, at least about 1.5 to 2 inches into the skin. So it grew around. It was growing with that thing around it, and was buried in there. And you can see the darts. There's one of the darts sticking out right there. There's the dart on there. And we were able to cut it off, pull it off, and there it is without the tire on it. And there's the tires and the tire right there. And inside the tire, there was a bottle in the middle of it. So what it was is on the bottom, obviously. And what happened is that I'm sure there were crabs also living in that tire on the bottom, and the sea lion was down there trying to get something out of it, and got its head stuck, and it just ended up being stuck on there. Well, anyway, we went ashore and watched it for a while. Pretty soon it woke up and looking around, and no tire on its head, and jumped in the water, and we never saw it again. So we assume it survived.
You
So
track them?
no, we didn't put a tracker on it. We didn't have a tracker at the time.
Yeah, look at how old that picture is.
Yeah, it's a while ago. It's interesting. We do track animals, but I haven't put any as an experiment to see what's going on with it. I haven't done that. The only time I put a tracker on anything is we have a buoy and a satellite tracker. And the reason we do that is because a lot of times an entangled whale is dragging the gear behind it. Okay, it's dragging netting or ropes or lines or something like that behind it. And what we always want to do is before you ever even try to do anything with the lines, you go up there and you can put a large buoy. It's a big buoy, heavy duty buoy with stainless steel rim around it, which I have. And I have a satellite tag that you put on there and you turn it on, and then we can find it again so that we can mount a proper response, because it usually takes a lot of people to go out and work on an animal like that. And this is a Pacific white-sided dolphin, one of those ones that were in the pods of 1,000 here. I did about 5 of these things that year because there were so many of them. There was enough of them died naturally. And that one, I do know what happened to it. When I did the necropsy, the stomach was about that big around, and it was just full of parasitic worms, absolutely as tight as a drum with parasitic worms. So it starved to death, basically, and they couldn't eat anything. And this is a guy by the name of Scott Adams. He used to be the NIMS enforcement guy. And I was going to put a picture of him there. We had one of it landed up on a property just north of town here, and people had a little paddle boat. And that's how we went out and got the thing. The lady reported it to us, and I went out there and looked, and she said, "There it is, right out there. See it?" And I said, "I don't see anything. It's right there, underwater, And I said, "Well, how long has it been underwater?" And she said, "Well, it's been about half hour, or 45 minutes." I said, "That animal's not alive anymore if it's been under that long." And so Scott went out and had an oar, and he was shoving it towards the beach, and we finally got it. Novel way of getting it up to the road and put into the truck so we could take it to the lab and cut it up was the little thing. And so that's the Pacific white-sided dolphin. And in fact, I'm going to show you the parts now, just real quick, since we're messing with this. But this here is, let's see, here's a humpback. This is that one I was standing on, right here. This is, and I'll let you guys come up and look at it. This is the vertebrae. And then that Pacific white-sided dolphin, one of the vertebrae from that is there. That's the difference in the sizes of the vertebrae.
Wow.
So you can come up and look at this later. Great. But it's kind of interesting to see them if you haven't seen how big these things are. Okay, how are we doing in time? Pretty good? Okay. The other is orca interactions. And I took this picture somewhere. I think this was on the other side of Pennick, actually, or Gravina, rather. And what I wanted to show you, there's 2 populations that we think about in this area. Not totally in our area, but the northern residents here are the ones that are common in this area, the northern residents. And where they are is they go from down here towards Johnstone Strait, which is right in this area here. This is Vancouver Island, and then up towards Alaska into the southern part of Alaska, and they do migrate around. But there's also a western residents that occupy most of the other area. But they really think these are there's a little bit of crossover, by the way, of these in both areas, and the ones that are really in trouble are these right here. These residents, these southern resident whales that are on the coast here, they've been knocked down. I'll show you a graph here in a minute of those. But notice that the northern residents, and I'm going to talk a minute about resident and transients as well, and then there's an offshore group of animals. They all have somewhat of a unique behavior. I'm not convinced that the stories are correct on that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But here's the southern resident whales. They're endangered, and these are the number of animals here, and this is over time. They've really been plummeting here, and they're going down to the point where they're down in the 70s now of how many animals are alive. In fact, I think this dot is over in here somewhere now. So they're really having problems. One of the problems with this group of whales, and I think they're being used as a leverage tool to prevent fisheries on Chinook specifically, is they're using this issue that they believe that resident animals only feed on Chinook salmon, which is ridiculous. They're not that, you know, they don't just feed on. First of all, they'd starve to death if that was the case, because the Chinook salmon, resident animals. I'm absolutely convinced that if there's a stream with a bunch of king salmon go back in it and they know it, they're going to go and eat them. I mean, that only makes sense. They're nice and together. There's a large number of them together. They can easily hunt them. But in the middle of the winter, no, they're not going to be able to find them. So that means they'd starve 9 months or 8 months of the year, and that doesn't happen in a killer whale. There's too much energetics in that animal for that to happen. So I don't believe that story at all. Even though I've gotten into terrible arguments with marine biologists over this, whale biologists that believe that they only eat king salmon, and therefore, if you catch a king salmon up here, even as a sport fisherman or a troller, they're going to try to cut you off because that's one fish that could go to a whale, a killer whale. And I'll show you the example of what they're going to do here. This just came out recently. There's a new analysis, a news thing that West Coast orca situation will impact salmon fisheries for years to come. This just came out just recently, just a few days ago, actually. What they're saying is NIMS announced that due to new information and better scientific data, they will reinitiate an ESA consultation on West Coast fisheries in 2019. That means they'll absolutely be able to restrict what is allowed to be caught in king salmon because they're saying the primary target will be interactions between Chinook salmon fisheries and orcas. But the review will also consider impacts to fisheries that have bycatch of salmon, such as whiting fisheries. Western Alaska sea lion is the example that you're using, similar to the orcas. There was a conflicting evidence about how much of a factor fishing was in the population decline, but the language of the endangered species that requires action if any harm is occurring. It does not have to be the major cause of harm to the population. The upshot is that the decline and feeding problems of the resident orca populations have now become a major factor in determining how various West Coast salmon fisheries will proceed. Because salmon abundance appears to be increasing this year, there may be some room for accommodate all requirements, but not without potential changes to the historical manner in which Chinook fisheries have been prosecuted. So they're talking about restricting, even though you might get from the treaty process, you might get a number that you're allowed to fish, they may go into ESA and say, no, we're not going to let you do that. And it's all based on the fact that they think these killer whales are totally dependent upon Chinook salmon. Well, we also, I know for a fact that they're not always eating Chinook salmon. They also eat bottom fish, they eat all kinds of other fish. We've seen examples at Whitman Lake, for example, where resident population of killer whales will be in there and they'll feed on the salmon going into Whitman Lake. Then they'll leave and go down George Inlet, and the seals will go in and they'll start raking the fish out, and pretty soon the killer whales come back and nail the seals. Mm-hmm. So we know they don't just eat salmon. It's a great belief that transient killer whales only eat marine mammals. Residents only eat salmon, and specifically king salmon. That doesn't make sense because in the middle of the winter, they're not schooled up enough that the energy required to chase a king salmon down has got to exceed the benefit that it would get from eating one king salmon. I don't believe it, okay? But I can't prove it. So we don't have any way of doing that, except that I did have a chance, and I'll show you an example. And it's this animal right here. It's called yakut. It's a killer whale. It's a member of the northern resident population. I got a call about, because a guy came into the NIMS office and said, hey, there's a killer whale dead out in Carroll Inlet. And I don't know how many of you have been aware of this, but there was a killer whale out there. This has been a couple years ago now. And so I called the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. They said, mount a response, please go out there. And I always work with the Coast Guard on this. So they reported it as being right there at that, that entrance to Carroll Inlet. There's a little cliff right here. That's where that animal was. And this is, of course, Mountain Point, Saxman, Ketchikan here, and Pennock Island, as you can see. So the Coast Guard, I get in there one of their fast 25-footers, and we go charging out there. And we finally come up to the beach right there at that island at a high tide, and there it is, laying on the rocks. This is a cliff right here, which you'll see in a moment, and it's laying there. We finally figured out that the guy that reported it wanted the teeth out of this animal. He's not permitted to do it. We didn't holler at him because we wouldn't have known this animal was there if he hadn't reported it. But they did confiscate the teeth from him. NIMS did, the office there. But what was not noticed on here once we got to the animal is the head was gone. We couldn't figure out what happened to the head. Okay, if you took the teeth out, why is the head gone? Well, I'll tell you about that in a moment. Okay, this is me right here getting ready to sample this because we wanted to get some DNA on the thing, figure out what animal this was. So I'm sitting there cutting stuff out of it. But then I saw that I could see underwater. This is the dorsal fin. And you can see the coloration here. And that's how they identify whales. On humpbacks, for example, it's the pattern of the white underneath the flipper, the fluke, the tail, basically. And they look at that pattern. They're very unique. They're like a fingerprint. On the killer whale, they'll use the notches that are bite marks or something on the fin, and they'll use this coloration right here. They're very unique to each of the killer whales. And there's a catalog of every one of these. In all these resident populations, they have a catalog for all of them. And so, I took a good picture of it, and that night when we got back in, after I just took a few samples of the DNA and took pictures, I called the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. They asked me to send the pictures. And then they sent it to the Vancouver Aquarium, which has the biggest resource of all those pictures on killer whales. And it turns out they were watching this whale for a long time. And this is just a picture. I flew back there to make sure it was still there, but I noticed the head was gone. Simply gone. The whale immediately was identified by the Vancouver Aquarium as Yakut, which is a member of this pod of A11. Yakut was one of the most famous whales on the West Coast, okay, that they've been watching since they believe this animal was born in 1958. So it was about 60, 70 years old. And there's a picture of it, and here's the, I don't know, there's the comparison. There's a picture that the Vancouver Aquarium took of the animal, and there's the coloration. You can see the notches in there. They're identical, and then of course the coloration. There's the notches. You can see them right there. Well, it turns out that they have a whole history of this animal, and in fact, this is her right here. She's the matriarch leader of this whole A4 pod, the A clan, A11. And by the way, the matriarchal, which means the female, is the head of the pod in resident whales. Anything that's gray here, we're still alive, even though when we took the picture, she's now white in this color code here. But these are the only two offspring, her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren here. And these are all the animals they've been watching for all the years, the whole lineage of what's there. Once she died, this female or this female probably is normally would take over the pod as being the leader of that pod. So Yakut was named after Yakut Cove on Nigel Island, west of Port Hardy, It's an adult female killer whale thought to have been born in 1958. It's likely that Kelsey, A24, is Yakut's sister. Yakut has 2 surviving offspring, daughters, Skagit, and all that. I'm not going to go through reading all this, but they got the whole family here. And Yakut belongs to the northern resident community of killer whales, which roams the waters off North Vancouver Island and the mainland coast as far north as southeast Alaska. There are 16 pods totaling more than 200 whales in the northern resident community of killer whales. Yakut heads one of the 3 matrolines in the pods known to researchers as A4 pod. It's one of the best known northern resident pods because it usually spends a great deal of time in Johnstone Strait. Oh, what did I do? I hit the wrong button there. Johnstone Strait during the summer. It is not known where these whales go in the winter months, as a mystery that researchers are anxious to solve. Well, I took that picture in January, so I know darn well where that pod went in the wintertime. And it, by the way, the following year after this, that same pod came up here and went up into Georgia Inlet. So we know they were doing it. Now, when we did the necropsy, and I'll show you a few shots, I'm not going to show you most of it. This is interesting that we solved that mystery for them through the program. It got written up in the Ketchikan Daily News. The necropsy, there's the animal on the rock, and you can see the head's missing. And it doesn't look big there, but it was very big. And the Coast Guard didn't want to let us on there. They said, it's too dangerous for you guys to go on the shore. We said, it's not too dangerous. We can get up there. And it turns out there's a flat bench right on the other side of this animal. It's kind of sitting on a bench. And we got up there, and we had the big effort. There was a guy from Vancouver that came up that has done hundreds of whales and necropsies. He was a veterinarian, and he came up and did most of the work. I just took pictures, so that was really good. And this is one of his assistants. And then we had a guy from the Seward Aquarium who was doing work with trying to tag, just what you were talking about, tagging these animals. He wanted to know how can we fix a tag on the dorsal fin. And so he cut the dorsal fin off in order to take it to Seward so we could experiment with different mounting systems on there to see, because how do you simulate that? It's pretty hard to simulate without knowing what the tissue's like and all that. Anyway, we worked on this, and this is Stefan, who's a big guy. He was probably over 6 feet tall, and he's sitting on top of the killer whale. You can see how big it is. And we took the stomach out of that animal. Stomach was about that big, pretty round, about like that big, and it was about 70 pounds. Okay, and I said, oh, good, we're gonna finally get evidence that they're eating seals, and this is a resident population, And what happens? We sent this thing off to a group of people that are firm believers in the Chinook only rule, and all I got back was a report that said there were 2 little otoliths in there that were large otoliths, presumably king salmon otoliths. And I can guarantee you that most whale biologists don't know how to read a salmon otolith, and how they identified them as king salmon is beyond me. And then there was 3 or 4 beaks from octopus in there. So we know that they were eating octopus or squid. Octopus or squid, we're not sure which. And I could account for about 4 or 5 ounces worth of material, and this stomach weighed something like 70 pounds. Now, I'm sure a lot of it was water, but also I'm sure it was digested meat from something else. Because if you're in Carroll Inlet in January, you're not feeding on king salmon. I can guarantee you that. You're feeding on something else. And the only thing up in there by the dozens are seals. So I'm sure they were up there feeding on seals. But they never took a sample of that juice and ran DNA on it, because I think they would have found that it would have been marine mammal parts. And plus, I'm sure they also, those otoliths could have been lingcod, they could have been any number of critters, rockfish for that matter. Some of the, your what we call the yellow eye rockfish or the red snappers, their otoliths are as big as a king salmon, easily. So it could have been any one of those.
I've had black cod fishermen tell me that the orca were pulling the black cod off their lines.
Yes. yes.
I mean,
I've heard the
they would
same
know
thing.
an orca from a
Yeah.
sperm
Yeah,
whale or
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that we don't know. You got to remember, we see, a couple % of the life cycle, really. I mean, think about these things are traveling through the water at 15, 20 knots, day and night, going long distances. The only time that most of these scientists that were working on these were visualizing what's going on is when they're in the front of a mouth of a stream down in Vancouver or somewhere where they're watching that stuff, which makes sense because I'm sure that if an animal is a resident and he knows that the stream is there and the fish come back to that stream, they're going to be there feeding on them. It only makes sense because the concentration of fish are there, and it's a good meal to get a king salmon. So I'm sure they feed on them. I'm not arguing that, but they're not going to be feeding on these things year round. And we don't see their life most of the time. They're underwater and they're moving fast, and these people, a lot of them are in kayaks that are doing the observation. They're not going to be able to follow these things and what they're doing. So I don't think we know very much about them.
I saw a whole pod of them chasing dolphins one day.
Yes.
Herring Cove. I saw them chasing. I mean,
Yeah.
like you see
And
the
those are
dolphins going
probably
like
a
this.
resident population, and one of the things we should probably do if we start seeing that kind of thing is get really good pictures to see if we can identify them as resident population to defeat that. I think it's a myth myself. It just doesn't make, from an energetic standpoint, it doesn't make sense that they only live on king salmon. It just doesn't make sense. They're not going to be king salmon are, first of all, they don't school up in the open water like that. Where you could make an efficient use of your body. And moving a big animal like that through the water takes a lot of energy. And I don't think they're going to get the nutritional value out of that. It just doesn't make sense to me from a biological standpoint. But you can't prove it because they absolutely believe this. By the way, this is the first cut into the animal when they started. We opened up the whole gut and everything, and the Coast Guard was laying off here, and the wind was blowing in this direction. And when that smell got out there, these guys whipped that boat around and went out and hung off that immediately. I mean, they went full blast at 50 mile an hour out to this point and turned around, and they all watched us with binoculars. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on why the decline in the southern groups are?
Well, I think that the environment has caused a lot of
Too many
problems down there.
boats and too much.
Well, there's a lot of that, but I think there's some pollution issues that they've identified already in these animals. There's all kinds of polycarbons and things that they're dealing with down there. And it may have, all you have to do is interfere with the birth rate and the success of birthing and all that, and you're going to see a decline because they do die, yeah.
Wasn't there a theory at one time that some orca populations feed on mammals, others feed on fish?
Yes, that's what the residents are supposedly only feed on fish, primarily king salmon. Transients only feed on marine mammals. And I don't believe either of those are true. I'm sure if a king salmon swam in front of a transient and he could grab it, he's going to grab it. I mean, these are smart animals. They're not going to waste energy trying to find their selected food. If they know where there's a population of fish going into a stream, they're going to go fishing. Now, I know that they've looked now at some of these resident populations that have learned where chum salmon are, and they feed on the chum salmon. We know that. Now, that's brand new, and the people that believe they only feed on king salmon were all upset that they made that conclusion. But the fact of the matter is we're learning more about them as we go through time, because we really don't see them very much. We only see them at real short periods of time. You've seen them out here. You watch them for 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you never see them again. Where'd they go? Because they move so fast. Well, that process is happening all the time. Okay, just about done. There's the cutting the fin off, right there. And then I'll go through. We gotta pretty much finish up.
We got minutes.
Okay, here's the humpback that, up north, that, and they're using a drone to look at the line, the way it was all tangled. This is up off of Dutch Harbor, just this summer. Okay, disentanglement, this is the one disentanglement. I had a call 10:30 one morning when I was over in Metlakatla, and this guy's had a
Oh, gosh.
had a boat, basically a gill netter, where the VHF was panicking because it was dragging him into the rocks. And the fisheries managers over there, Dustin and Kevin, they're wonderful to work with, requested me go out there because I'm permitted to do it. And we took their aluminum boat. It took 15 minutes to go out there. And this is where it was. The boat was launched here and we went around Cove. And that just shows where it was. And this is gill net. You've probably all seen gill net gear, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But this is typical. The gill netter is drifting and he leaves his net out. This is the back of the net. The whale goes into it, crashes into a gill net. This isn't the gill net that was entangled. It's just a picture I took to show people what a gill netter does. And this is what we found when we got out there. Whale was completely covered. And you can see this whale is totally engulfed in netting. And we went up to it, and Dustin and those guys had never worked on one, and I said, just be careful here, you know, we got to be careful because they can use their flipper and bang you real bad. And it was interesting to watch. The flippers were pinned to its side, so it couldn't maintain balance. But the animal did a really good thing. It was pulling all the time, and the boat was pulling the other direction, and they were fighting each other. So it wore the animal out. Our response normally is to put buoys and all kinds of, as much junk as we can on the end of whatever's dragging behind it, so that it wears the animal out, so that it gives up. And then you can go work on it, you know, and cut stuff off. So we started cutting off. They did. I took pictures to get out. I'm always just taking pictures. And you can see, the only tab was that knife. That's the only thing we had. We didn't have the right gear at all. And eventually it started clearing all the netting off the animal. And you can see we were cutting these big lines. It doesn't pay to cut anything else because the netting is just like paper mache. They just punch right through that stuff. They don't deal with that. But this is what it looked like as we were going through it. And there he is cutting through it. And that's the kind of stuff we were cutting. These bigger lines, they can't break that very easy, but they can sure bust the net up. Eventually, the animal, there's the barnacles on the top of the head, basically, right there. And all the netting is off of it at that point. We could also see the line still dragging behind one of the flippers, but the flipper is released now and out. And this took us about 20 minutes to 30 minutes is all it took us to do that. There's Dustin working on the animal. And eventually it was totally loose and swam away happy as could be. So we were able to get it out of there. What we did right, it was quick response, good weather, clear weather, safe operators. Those guys were great. A whale was worn out by the gill netter, which was really good. Safety boat and the gill netter were standing by. They had another boat came out to watch us. What was wrong was we no way or time to mount a proper response and contact Marine. There was no cell service, so I couldn't contact the Marine Stranding Network to get permission to do it. I'm supposed to get permission to work on a humpback. Wrong boat, kind of boat. Usually you use a rubber inflatable of some sort. No disentanglement tools. We have special tools now that you use to cut those big lines. They're little, so you don't cut the animal. It's just the rope gets caught and goes up and gets sliced by a blade up inside like a hook. No disentanglement tools. There was no way to track the animal after release or confirm all the gear was removed. We just had no way. But it never washed up, and we didn't see any gear when it left. And it got written up in the North Pacific Large Whale Disentanglement Network as a successful release. So that's it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Hey, Gary,
Yes.
down by Revilla Channel, you know, in that island on one side and over to Alva on the other, there's some rock piles down that way, over on the net side. and I was transient at the area, and this is probably 20, 30 years ago, and I actually saw killer whales chasing seals up onto the rocks or trying to get them off. Now, in that area, I don't know whether it would have been transients or
It could have been
residents,
either.
but, you know, yeah, you can watch them, and they're
Yeah. No,
a group
I-
of them trying to get them off the rocks or get them before they get up on the rocks.
I don't know the answer to it, but I can't believe that it makes sense that they only feed on king salmon. It doesn't make common sense or biological sense, simply because the amount of energy it would take to catch a king salmon and single individual king salmon in the water, whether a killer whale could even do that, because the fish is going to be more maneuverable. I don't know, but in a school, they could certainly get them. And that's why I think in the residents in the mouths of streams probably take salmon. But I don't believe that 9 months of the year, they're going to starve to death, you know, and not eat fish.
Another question is humpback whales, when you see them or you're in an area and you're dead in the water and they come around you and everything, and you're just sitting there, been there for an hour or so taking photos and that, are they curious enough to come back to see if they bumped something? I had one come up and bump the bottom of my
I think they
boat,
probably are.
because it went probably 30,
I
40
mean,
feet.
I don't know. It's really
Turn around
tough
and
to
come
know
back.
what whales are thinking. Everybody always was, did this whale, was it happy when it left? I said, I have no idea. It never smiled at me, but it took off and seemed to be doing just quite well. But I just don't know. I just don't know whether they, you know, it's hard for us to give, we can easily give human behavior to their mind, but I don't, it's something so totally foreign to us. I don't think we know what goes through in their minds and
I
how
was
it
just
works.
dead in the water taking photos.
I'm sure they react. I mean, they absolutely don't fight you when, they didn't fight us at all. He didn't fight us at all when we were cutting. I mean, he just laid there. He would come up, you know, he'd come up to the surface and blow, and in fact, it scared Dustin something awful the first time he come up, because the breath is hot. I mean, it's very high temperature air comes out, and it hit him in the face, so this hot air hit him in the face, and it scared the heck out of him. And I said, no, that's normal, it's normal, it's just, they have a high body temperature, and it's just the way it is. So, yes.
Did you ever find the head of the orca?
Oh, that's a great question. Just like you to tell the story. We went back there, and it turns out the head was up on above the animal, because the animal, when the guy found it, was up high on the rocks, and he cut the head off, not to get the head. He cut the head off because he wanted to roll it over to get the other side of the teeth. He couldn't roll the big animal over, but he could roll the head over, which is about this big, you know. So when we went out there to do this necropsy, we sent the guy from the Seward Aquarium up to the top, and I'm down lower. We're up there, you know, we were cutting the animal up down below, and all of a sudden he's up there wrestling this head because we wanted to get brain tissue and stuff, and it got loose on him, and it comes rolling down the hill, and this big killer whale head comes down, and we jumped out of the way and went right in the water and straight to the bottom.
Oh.
So we did go out there to look for it with the ROV I have. We never found it, but it went to the bottom. It just rolled down off the hill and past us. It's pretty unusual to see a big giant head of a whale coming down after you. Yes,
How do you cut the head off?
he used a knife.
He was big.
Yeah. It must have taken time because it was probably about that big around where he cut it.
And you do what with the teeth?
He pulled them out. They're still down at the NOAA office down there. They've got them. They got all the teeth in a bucket down there. And in fact,
The earrings.
they've got a couple animals they've got all the teeth from. Somehow you can pull them out. I don't know how you do it. But again, you know, you're not allowed to do it if there's skin on the animal. It has to be totally bare of meat for them to keep it. If you find it, a skull, for example, that it's bare, and you get the teeth out, all you need to do is go into the NIMS office within 30 days of finding it, and they'll register it for you. You're not allowed to sell it. You're not allowed to do anything with it, and keep it as a something in your house like that, you know. I can keep that stuff because I've got a permit to do it, but I also have, because I have the permits of endangered species and all that, I've got a whale, humpback whale skull in my yard. And it's not because I wanted it, it's because the people that took it with a helicopter, and somebody reported it as, they wanted to know what kind of animal, and the enforcement went out there and found it, and they made the guy that took it by the helicopter, it was one of the Eichner's, in fact, it was a dead animal. I did a necropsy on the animal, and it was laying over in Kisan, over by Kisan Bay, and they lifted it over to up above Tyler Rental there, and they were training bus drivers up there. And the bus drivers saw it. One of the bus drivers saw it. Says he goes down to the NIMS office and says, "Hey, what kind of whale is that out there right there?" And of course, the NIMS enforcement guys run out there. And they said, "You're not allowed to have this." And they started telling the guy they're going to fine him and all this stuff. And they said, "Okay, listen, we just need to get you to move this. You're not allowed to have that. And here's an address you can take it to, because I've got the permit." So I'm sitting in my yard not knowing that anything's coming out, and a flatbed comes out with a crane on it and swings the thing onto my driveway. And I put a chain around it and a block up in the trees and pulled the thing up into the woods. I didn't want the darn thing. It's still out there, it's still rotting away out there. That was years ago.
Got a
So,
question.
yes.
Is it illegal to harass seals?
No. It's illegal to harass seals, any marine mammal, any marine mammal. I've gone down, I can harass them because I got that permit to do it. But I've gone down, I've had some of the air services, the seals were going up on his ramp, and they called me about it. I said, "How do we get rid of them?" And I said, "I'll come down," and I went down with a broom, and the seal was laying there, and I just kept shoving it in the water, and it kept coming back up, and I'd shove it back in the water, and eventually it got tired of that and swam off. But yeah, they'll actually set residents up if they can. Yeah. Yes.
If you found dried whalebone out on the beach, are they gonna check for speciation to let you know?
If they don't know what it is, if the enforcement guys don't know what it is, they're gonna assume that it's a humpback unless it's a certain size. Like, you can see if it's that size, chances are, they're gonna say it's a endangered species. But they can't, it's hard to tell. If you look at that little boat over there, if you go over there and look at that, I've done harbor porpoise and doll porpoise and all those, and they're all similar. You'd have a hard time figuring out what kind of species it is. I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. I'm sure there's somebody that specializes in that and knows how to do it, but I sure don't. And I'm sure the enforcement guys don't. Okay, I guess that's it. So thank you for coming.